Welcome today to the Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where I'm very, very happy that a good friend of Cynthia and myself, Madison Holmes, is going to be presenting on some topics which you really wouldn't think should be as controversial as they have become in our confused age of postmodernistic, post-structuralism, deconstruction, blah, blah, blah. We're in a very jellyfish land right now where people's brains have kind of melted and common sense has flown out the window some time ago. So it's really good that we're going to be able to just use basic common sense reasoning skills to just tackle not just the question of womanhood, which really, I mean, it could only be done by a young woman. So I'm really glad Madison took this up, but more specifically, some of the more disturbing undertones of the rise of feminism. Not to say that feminism itself should be just judged as one thing or another, because frankly, as we can all acknowledge, women have gotten a really tough. It's been tough. It's been really. There's been a lot of injustice over many centuries and millennia on the female sex, and that has to be dealt with. And the idea of treating human beings as actual human beings made in the image of a living, loving, reasonable, creative force, however you might want to label that or think about that, that's a long-term fight. But the idea of whatever this thing is that's taken precedent in people's psyche, that's characterized an attribute of them, a secondary or tertiary attribute, as above their universal attributes of being human first, is really scrambled the powers of judgment of a lot of people. So again, the occult aspects of some of the weird stuff going on in this domain is something I've been fascinated by. Madison's done a lot of work, and as a youth leader, somebody who's an eloquent thinker and speaker, I'm really excited to just sit back, learn, and like usual, after Madison's remarks are finished, the formal presentation, we'll just field questions, and I ask people to throw in their name into the chat box or raise your digital hand, and I'll call upon you accordingly. So, Madison, thank you so much. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction, and I'm really excited to see everybody. Thank you for coming. For the nature of womanhood, I might leave that for the more, the dialect part at the end where we do Q&A, because the truth about womanhood is it's a negotiation. So there's no better way to talk about it than at the end when there's a negotiation between me and everybody else here. Where maybe I'll touch a little bit on my own personal journey with that. But for the presentation itself, I tried to do my best to focus on just who the financiers are, and the 1 degree of separation from all these really renowned feminists to esoteric organizations such as the Transcendental Club, Theosophy, and how those figures capitalized and guided the movement. So I guess we can just kick it off from there then. Can everybody see this?
Yep.
Okay, would you prefer presentation view?
Yep.
Everybody? Yeah. Okay. Okay, occult feminism. Here we go. My main resource was this book, Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation by Rachel Wilson. I will talk about my personal trepidations and journey reading this at the end, but I took her work initially. I had watched a podcast between her and Germ Warfare that was actually sent to me by a fellow youth member, Tom Shaw from Over to the Youth, and it kicked off that Promethean fire, and I went, I need the book and I need it now. So I read it, and then when Matthew asked me to do this presentation, I reread it again, and then I did it on audiobook just so I could get it in my brain and then start writing down where I need to start connecting the dots, because I had only started, Matthew, your work a little bit when before I read her work. So it was a lot for me to try and bridge the connection, because I knew I could feel it, and I just had to figure out how to do it concisely. So let's see if I did a good job. It all starts in Sumer, Mesopotamia. Now, if I butcher a bunch of names, forgive me. I didn't know, these are just general timelines at the bottom here. I'm going to start by going through really prominent goddesses and deities that still play out today throughout the movement. So Mesopotamia, Sumer, the Uruk period from 4000 BC to 31, that's kind of when the development of some of these goddesses I discovered started to show up. And this Gilgamesh character I will also go into, because Inanna, Ishtar being one of the really big goddesses, bleeds into the epics of Gilgamesh, which I didn't know. And there's some lost in translation because Sumer, they originally spoke Sumerian, and then the Akkadian Empire, who spoke Akkadian, there was some mistranslations in the tablets, so not everything is set in stone, even though it is literally in stone. But this Sumerian Inanna, she became Ishtar when there was the translation over into the Akkadian Empire. She was known as Inanna initially, and she had her own temple of Inanna in the city of Uruk. This is a funny parallel that you mentioned in your Del Bigtree interview, Matthew, between the Polo-Dionysian, work during the day, war during the day, and then the promiscuous love fun at night. They also worshipped Inanna morning versus night, two separate worshiping times, which is parallel because they considered her to be a parallel of the planet Venus. And when you physically see Venus at two separate times of the day, which is why they made that correlation. So she was considered to be the goddess of love and war. Now, love is a very, very broad term when it comes to deities and their characters. So I'll tell you a little bit about her stories further. She ends up connecting, as I find, to the Greek Aphrodite and Romans Venus. Again, funny enough how they considered her literally to be the parallel of the planet Venus, having separate worshiping times for her. And these are just some timelines for me personally, because when I started this, Rachel doesn't necessarily paint a pretty timeline. And doing your work, I never knew when Mesopotamia was. I didn't, even the centuries, I'm just starting to get 8th century literally means, 100 years backwards. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to catch up. So this was just for my own timeline. Now, on the right here is Inanna, some of the first showing visuals of her. You can see the 8-pointed star in the top left. That was the symbol for Venus, along with other interpretations. You can see the horned crown she wears, which is, funny enough, parallel to Isis. She wears the same horn crown. And she's standing accompanied by a lion. Now, the lion goes into some of her symbology and her representations. You can see on the left here, we have a lion. This is Inanna's temple in Sumer. And they had incantation bowls for many of these goddesses because they accompanied the myths and the legends that were associated with them. And this bowl was called Inanna and the Serpent. And Inanna was portrayed as this female lion, symbology of power. And the aforementioned star, because she was associated with Venus, she was called in those stories where she was represented as the star, the Queen of Heaven, which so is Aphrodite, and Lady of Heaven was for Isis. So there's just these weird, and they're all in the same 3000 BC time period, which I found was very interesting how, as I know, because of the brain, we all find very similar representations to represent aspects of life. We personify them as these deities, and I think that's because of the brain why they end up drawing so many parallels, as well as the fact that we know through domination, conquest, and all of these oligarchs literally taking over and absorbing previous cultures. So the star, 8-pointed star of Venus and Inanna, eventually became the rosette when it transferred over into the Akkadian Empire. Hence, you can see the roses below the lion on the right, on the left, and on the right, we can see her. Some of the, I don't know how to say this. That blue word, is it cuneiform? Anybody?
I think so. That's what I say.
I thought it was cuneiform.
Yeah, cuneiform.
All right.
Okay.
What Jenny and Jerry said. Yes.
Cuneiform it is. So these were some of the earliest cuneiforms of Inanna, and it was that hook-shaped knot of reeds. Reeds was a common building material in Sumer. So you would find it on storehouses and buildings and outside of the temples, which denoted plenty, fertility, which you see in some of her earliest drawings. You can see her even here. This is some of her origin stories, which I will give a little bit into because there's some weird connections down the line. You can see the reed posts. She's holding them on the left and right on either side of her. Again, standing upon the lion and representing her power that you can see in the cuneiforms. We'll get that eventually. Now, this is Inanna's character. This is her narrative. Again, as I mentioned, of invoking incantations and hymns, the one I have listed here, Inanna and Utu. Utu was known as her brother. And this hymn expounds the story of her becoming the goddess of sex. And there's a reason why I said love is a very broad term, because as Rachel kind of points out, all of these origin and myth stories for these deities, love really means desire, passion, promiscuity, and it ends up being this weird conglomeration of just female sexuality. So it was a story, the hymn of her becoming the goddess of sex. And how it goes is her brother, she goes to him and says, "I'm ignorant. I want to know more. I heard there's a tree in the underworld that bears fruit, holding the knowledge of sex. Take me." And so he takes her, and that's how she acquires the knowledge of sex, is eating the fruit bared from an underworld tree. And it's not the only scenario where she goes into the underworld, because the title of the slide is one of her most renowned stories, Inanna's Descent into the Underworld, where, again, she goes into the underworld for various purposes. There's two different versions, depending on the Sumer poems that she originated in, that eventually turn into the Epic of Gilgamesh in the Akkadian language. But in that story, she goes into the underworld. She ends up dying, but it's okay. It's okay, because in a couple of days, she resurrects, and then she's back to the land of the living. So those are two interesting, because understanding that some of the paganistic aspects that came before Christianity is something I'm just delving into. So I thought those were really interesting parallels. And then the Sumerian poem is the one I alluded to earlier, which is some of the first poems where she and Gilgamesh were introduced into the world. That one being called Enki and the World Order. It was the equivalent of their creation myth. So I guess that brings us to Gilgamesh. Now, this is the Sumerian story time. This is the fun part. So this expansion into Gilgamesh, these are the two main stories where she really starts to evolve into that ideal independent woman that seems to be praised in today's feminism. So the first one, this Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld, is from the epic. And how this one goes is Inanna, she claims a tree. It's called a Halupu tree. Now, they speculate it's a willow. There's no guaranteed on that. But she claims it. It's growing by the Euphrates River. And then she takes it to her city in Uruk alongside her temple. And she says that she wants it to become her throne when it's fully grown. Unfortunately, that beautiful tree, originally monotheistic, experiences a coup d'etat and becomes a pantheon of a serpent, an Anzu bird, which is some weird lion, griffin-like creature from their culture, and what they call a Lilitu or a Lilith. It's a Mesopotamian spirit demon, and more on that later. Luckily, the serpent is slain thanks to Gilgamesh, as you can see on the left here, and him holding the serpent in his right hand, and then he's cradling the lion, another symbol for Inanna. He slains the serpent, which scares off the weird Anzu griffin-like bird and the spirit demon Lilith. After that, Inanna gives him gifts to say thank you, and he ends up losing them. So his best friend Enkidu, who has a whole Sumerian poem of his own, and it is really neat. I'm not going to go into it because there's a lot to cover here today. Enkidu ends up going to find those lost gifts for him. And then the second one, this one is really interesting, knowing what I've learned from Matthew, the cult of Mithra, Sybil and Attis, and Isis. But this one, back in the Uruk period of 4000 BC, Gilgamesh and the Bowl of Heaven. So upon Gilgamesh's return from another battle, another epic that they wrote about, Inanna, now known as Ishtar, because this is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, again, it got translated into the Akkadian language. So Inanna got renamed Ishtar from the language switch. So Inanna, now Ishtar, she approaches Gilgamesh, and she is ardent upon their joint dalliance. Be with me. I demand it. Of course, she has a reputation for treating her men very poorly, not in a nice manner, which is kind of BDSM today, which, we all know Rihanna loves that sort of stuff. So him knowing about her infamous reputation with her men says, no, thank you, I opt out. He thwarts her attempts, which put her in a revenge rage. So she goes to heaven to complain to her father and her mother, named Mother Antu, Father Anu. And she says, help me get my revenge. Of course, her father's like, this is not a good idea, especially when she says her idea is to send the Bowl of Heaven after him. Father is very reluctant, but she threatens him and to release this horrible plague upon the earth and raise all living dead, just rain hell if he does not help her. So he concedes and sends the Bowl of Heaven after Gilgamesh, which is where you can see him on the right. Him and his very close friend Enkidu slain the Bowl of Heaven, which ends up causing Enkidu to get punished later because, you just killed the Bowl of Heaven, so there's punishment. That doesn't go without reaction. So those stories do in fact translate over into Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and Hesiod's Theogony. But to start here, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh and some of the parallels in the Iliad. Aphrodite, who is Mesopotamia's Ishtar and Inanna, flees to Mount Olympus to exclaim her indignation to her mother after being wounded by hero Diomedes. Well, in that one, she goes to complain to her parents, Aphrodite, and Zeus, again, scolds her, thinking not such of a good idea. And a neat language parallel is the fact that, so her mother, that is her name, according to some of the research I did, is the female of Zeus, and same with in Sumerian and Akkadian. Antu is the female of Anu, again, parents of Inanna and Ishtar. Whereas in Odyssey, you have the Enkidu and Gilgamesh story. Well, Odysseus's men in Odyssey kill the cattle of Helios, and Zeus threatened by Helios to punish the offenders, like Ishtar threatens her father. So there's some cool little side notes in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, because originally I thought it was just the Theogony where you drew the parallels. There's a couple more in parallels in Odyssey Book 9, but again, because there's a lot to cover, I don't go into that. I'm leaving some threads loose for people to unravel their own story. Now, this is fun because people usually don't associate Lilith coming back to the Mesopotamian era, but I found some goddesses and some aspects of Inanna and Ishtar that do connect with today's modern demigoddess of Lilith. So in Mesopotamia, they had a demigoddess, which is another daughter of Anu, so sister of Inanna, and this name is Lamashtu. Lamashtu and Inanna would be called in incantations alongside one another. Lamashtu is known for mutilating children, drinking the blood of men, and spreading disease. So pretty nice things. And a common method for protection when they would do the incantations to ward off Lamashtu was amulets. Well, similarly, you had the spirit demons I alluded to, also invoked on incantation bolts. They were called the Lilith, and they were known to take either a woman or a man's form to seduce the opposite spouse, conceive illegitimate demon children, and that would put the whole family in disarray. Lilith, as she's admired in people like Aleister Crowley's religion, that comes more from the Jewish folklore, but that still ties in, and I'll allude to that. This story of Alphabet of Ben Sarah, where Lilith is said to be the first Adam of wife, feminists would love the fact that she does not accept her existence in this story unless she's considered completely equal to Adam, which is why she ends up leaving and then God has to replace her with Eve. But that's a down the line thing. In the story of the Alphabet of Ben Sarah, where this Lilith, people put amulets just like Lamashtu around children to protect them because she would spread sickness and death to infants like Lamashtu. So there's these really weird parallels. And one thing, if you remember the spirit demon that I alluded to, they were known for terrorizing men in the night. Same way on these incantation bowls. And that also translates into Jewish folklore. That same Sumer Mesopotamia legend of these spirits terrorizing men, taking the form of men and women, that same story goes into the Jewish folklore later on, the Lilith night spirits that attack men. So there's this weird misandry going on with all these weird spirit demons. And that Jewish folklore did originate from the Babylonian Talmud, is what I found out. And that's like 6th century AD. So it's, again, downstream of the Greek, the Roman, and this Sumer. And the Jewish folklore, all the mysticism of Lilith comes from the Zohar. And the Zohar is literary works that focuses just on the mystic and the occult aspect of the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses from the Hebrew Bible. So it's just this amalgamation. So it's one of those, when people argue about Lilith, some people say she doesn't even exist. And it's like, although I'm with you, brother, there are people who do study the works of these mystics because they do believe that it's a thing. So whether we like to say it or not, it is continued to this day for a reason. And that is because some people do idealize the mystics and these paganistic aspects. Now, the funny thing about Lamashtu is that she was a hybrid demigoddess. She had a lion head, same thing as Inanna, that representation, a bird body, donkey teeth, and really elongated nails. So this weird thing. And then Lilith and Lilitu, when directly translated from the Sumerian Akkadian, was often thought to be, those night demons were screech owls, night birds. Well, this is a movie called Under the Silver Lake, and we watched it. It was recommended, if I'm not mistaken, by Bellis from Rogue News. And I don't like the movie. It made me very, very uncomfortable, but it was recommended for all of the nudges. And in it there's this scene. This is the Owl's Kiss. Now, the Owl's Kiss is a lost legend of folklore, just as terrifying as the Wolfman of Frankenstein's monster. She is a woman who will rise in the night through windows and locked doors, naked except for her masked taxidermy owl skin, like those night demons. And she seduces men and women alike, killing them in their sleep. So that movie, known for its nudges and me seeing all these parallels between these ancient Mesopotamian demons and deities, I was like, made me think of her, and it made me highly uncomfortable. But now that we've got some of the history between those old deities and some of their origin stories, their narratives, their characters, what they're known for, the weird misandry of men, child killing and disturbing, let's connect some of the dots. Now, this is another thing that I found when I was doing my research. I searched up Inanna to find a little bit more about her, and this Canadian Independent Feminist Press came up. So I made the mistake of assuming that these feminist movements, they weren't aware, and some of them might not be aware that this is what they're worshiping. But on the other hand, they're also very aware, which is why you get contemporary goddess culture like this, which is a Canadian Independent Feminist Press. Now let's bridge the gap between that knowledge and then the knowledge that Matthew, Cynthia have done in series like The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs. We get introduced to Oath Mother Gaia. Gaia isn't just in the theogony, she's also mentioned in Homer's poetic oaths. And then, as Cynthia so beautifully narrated in The Hidden Hand, we have Gaia, who conceives Uranus via parthenogenesis, and parthenogenesis means no need for a man. The egg just gets fertilized on its own and grows. So we have Uranus, and then her and Gaia, so her son, now also her consort, they birth the Titans. And him not liking the Titans, one of his sons, Kronos, on command of his mother, comes in a not so sexual time to get rid of his Johnson, and Aphrodite is born from the Johnson into the sea. So that's how we have this connection from Mesopotamia. Now we're in Greece, 700 BC. Which leads us to this. This is the Sybil, Attis, Mithra, Isis cults that Matthew and Cynthia have covered so extensively, so I don't even need to go into it other than some of the fun parallels, like the castration of Attis from being a brother, uncle, lover to Sybil, like Uranus to Gaia. And then the Taurobolium, the decapitation of the bull, like Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Same thing in Rome. Matthew points out in his a really concise interview with Del Bigtree. If you haven't watched it yet, it's one of those must. It's a must. It's a necessary. He points out the worship during the day versus the night, war versus love, that same Apollo Dionysian-like practice. And then we have Isis, Lady of Heaven, like Inanna, like Aphrodite. Again, wife and sister to Osiris, depending on the story. And then also known as the mother of Apis, which is a worshipped Memphis bull. And then I found there's the legend of Horus decapitating Isis and replacing her head with that of a cow's, which explains, they said, some of the depictions of Isis wearing that horned crown, which reminds me of the horned crown that Inanna in that first statue that I showed you where she's depicted. So all of these weird connections, which also leads down to the Knights Templars of the 12th century AD. And we know what the Baphomet looks like, that again, weird hybrid like Lamashtu, that goat with the wings, woman, man body. So a lot of just weird parallels that keep continuing and showing up. Now, this is where the modern day female figures really come in, and we get demonstrated the connection. I literally just searched popular feminists, so to show you some of the connections here. And these are also names that are mentioned in Rachel's work. So thank you, Harper Bazaar, for giving me feminism information. This is Simone de Beauvoir. She is, as you can see here, an outspoken political activist, writer, and social theorist. In 1949, de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex, an ahead-of-its-time book credited with paving the way for modern feminism. In the influential and controversial book, de Beauvoir critiques the patriarchy and social constructs faced by women. The Second Sex was banned by the Vatican and even deemed pornography by some. Fearless start to the fight for feminism. Well, this is what I learned about Miss Simone de Beauvoir. She quotes in her book, The Second Sex, Inanna's the undomesticated, unattached woman. So already a direct idealization of the pagan worship. She also says, as long as the family and the myth of the family and the myth of maternity and the maternal instinct are not destroyed, women will still be oppressed. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will pick that one. I wonder why. Another very prominent feminist is Betty Friedan. What they have written here is she's the American writer and activist penned The Feminine Mystique. Now, that's a very interesting title considering the literal mystic practices that have been incorporated into feminism today. It is credited for sparking the second wave of feminism that began in the 60s and 70s. Friedan spent her life working to establish women's equality, helping to establish the National Women's Political Caucus, as well as organizing the Women's Strike for Equality in 1970, which popularized the feminist movement throughout America. Now, what I learned, she graduated from Smith College, which was one of the first women's college in the US. She's the president and founder of the National Organization for Women. Her book, The Feminine Mystique, is on the misfortune of stay-at-home motherhood. And she signed the UN Humanist Manifesto II alongside Julian Huxley in 1973, which affirms Darwinian evolution, birth control, divorce, and abortion, all of these very prominent feminist tenets of today. This one is one of my favorites, Gloria Steinem. She is referred to as the mother of feminism. Gloria Steinem led the women's liberation movements through the 60s and 70s. She continues to do so today. Co-founder of the feminist-themed Miss magazine and several female groups that changed the face of feminism, including Women's Action Alliance, National Women's Political Caucus, Women's Media Center, and more. All of her efforts led to her induction into the National Women's Hall of Fame, which I didn't know was a thing, so I looked that up right after. In 1993 and 2013, she was honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Steinem continues to be a trailblazer for feminists today, most recently with her Viceland series, Woman and Post-Election Action for Young Girls and Women. Now, this one is one of the most punch-in-the-face realizations. She is a granddaughter and a daughter to both suffragists and theosophists Pauline Steinem and Ruth Steinem. She also graduated from Smith College, where she was scouted by the CIA to enter India for 2 years and associate with Gandhian independence movements and work with Jean Joyce of the Ford Foundation. After India, CIA sent her to Europe under the National Student Association, working under the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Now, on the right, you can see the first cover of Miss Magazine. You can read Gloria Steinem on sisterhood, raising kids without sex roles, women tell the truth about their abortions, which reminds me a little bit about Margaret Sanger's claims about those letters of all those women who had very horrible abortion procedures go on, yet they could never find the letters conveniently. So Gloria and her CIA partner, Clay Felker, they set up the Miss magazine because it was the first feminist magazine in 1972, and it was done under the order for Operation Mockingbird, whose head was Cord Meyer. And then Gloria, she participated, they mentioned some of the groups that she mentioned. The one they didn't mention was a group called Cell 16, whose members included Abby Rockefeller, which is David Rockefeller's daughter. So some really fun parallels there. Now, if you look at the figure on the right here, there's like 8 arms going on, bunch of little things in her hand, blue skin. That's not just a random mockery of women. This is Kali. Kali is a Hindu goddess. She's known as the Dark Mother of time, change, creation, power, destruction, and death. Now, Shaktism, as I have above, it is goddess-centric. There's 3 main sects to Hinduism. One of the biggest ones being their supreme god Vishnu, and then you have Shiva, and then this third one being Shaktism, which is goddess-centric. I believe there's 10 of them that make up the prime deities of this branch. And it's funny because Vishnu is said to be Kali's brother, and Shiva is said to be Kali's consort. So I wonder why they needed to make an entirely woman-only sect, but that's just young speculation from me. She can be depicted with anywhere from 4 to 10 arms, frequently with red eyes, black or blue skin, and the lolling tongue. Now that one's very conspicuous because if you look at photos of our prominent feminists today, Ariana Grande, Taylor Swift, Miley Cyrus, Cardi B, they are often depicted doing, everybody knows this sign, with the tongue out. That one. So the lolling tongue is a significance because for Kali, it symbolized the fact that she held no shame. She was free and loose. So when she's depicted often with garlands of heads, sometimes skulls, as you can see on the photo on the right, she's wearing a garland of heads. She's been known to wear skirts made of human arms, and she wears embryo earrings, which I found that one personally unsettled my stomach. Now, Kali's ultimate goal is to achieve that of moksha, and what moksha is, it's liberation. And liberation that can only be achieved via divine knowledge, a transcending. And she does this by decapitating people because, human ego is the bane of all existence, and that is in our head. So decapitate people, and they are free to transcend into their divine knowledge and achieve liberation. Her 2 main myth stories are, as you can see here, Slayer of Raktabija, assuming I said that wrong. This story, Kali defeats a demon, Raktabija, with sword and noose. She's wearing her skull, garland, and tiger skin. This weird parallel between tigers, lions being a symbol of power for women. And she literally consumes the hordes of this demon because it's one of those cut off one head and then he just spreads. Anytime he bleeds on the floor, he just multiplies. So her solution, drink the blood and consume them all with her long lolling tongue. Another battle that she single-handedly wins, because she's very war savvy, leaves her enveloped in a bloodlust of rage, and it's an extinction level event. She doesn't know when to stop. She just destroys everything in her path. And this is only stopped by her consort Shiva, as you can see he's literally under her foot on the floor on the right there. That very sacrificial act is what arouses her from her killing frenzy. So makes perfect sense why a feminism CIA magazine would put her on the first cover as their mission to support this pagan-like push of female sexual liberty. This leads us to official mystics. I got this quote again from The Hidden Hand Behind UFO. For the radical and permanent transformation of personality, only one effective method has been discovered, that of the mystics, which is Kali's goal and what you can achieve through the incantations. Now, I personally had never seen the Theosophy symbol till I looked it up for this presentation. It's the one on the far right with the snake eating its own tail. And the swastika, I believe that's the Star of David, sometimes called King Solomon's seal. And then at the top, you have the Hindu symbol of Om. And Om it's a Hindu invocation. It's supposed to be the most supreme, absolute invocation for consciousness, literally consciousness and essence of the world. It is. I know some people say that there's no such thing as absolutes, but this is the absolute supreme. So that is the big symbol that reads, "There is no religion higher than truth" of Theosophy. And this leads us into more modern figures like Margaret Fuller. Now, Margaret Fuller, again, in the National Women's Hall of Fame, I looked it up to find her, or find it. I didn't know it existed. They say her thoughts and writings inspired leaders of the women's movement. which she did. Both her Woman in the 19th Century book inspired Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, both very prominent feminists in the early movements. She was a literary critic, free thinker, transcendentalist leader. Again, so they don't hide that, which just goes to show that this is something, there's no need to be ashamed of worshiping these pagans and things like Wicca, which is a modern version of witchcraft. There's no shame to do these things because that is how we females get liberated today. What I found from her is that she wrote, well, her alongside Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thomas Carlyle founded Transcendentalism. Thomas Carlyle, I know thanks to Matthew's work, was the Padawan to James Mill and Jeremy Bentham, both British intelligence agents. So again, that Gloria Steinem CIA connection, and then we have Transcendentalism, which is more of the spiritual side of feminism, still tapped into by intelligence agencies. They didn't leave that stone unturned. And this whole thing based on the German philosopher and philosophy of Immanuel Kant. It combines Unitarianism, Hinduism, as we saw, Eastern mysticism, both from Egypt, India, nature worship, you name it, they had it. I will speak about Bronson Alcott in a moment. On the right, this is something I found from a Substack by Matthew, because I did not know, and this would have been great for my presentation had I known this, that Matthew did a connection on Transcendentalism to Theosophy. He literally covered it, and I didn't find it till yesterday. So I added this because it does speak to some of the connections. In 1842, Margaret Fuller wrote the above letter, or the one on the right here, to her mentor, a fellow Transcendentalist, and brother-in-law, William Ellery Channing. And this kind of expounds her faith. She says, "I have no trouble so far from the sacrifice required of Abraham. It is prefiguring a thought to be fully expressed by the death of Christ. Yet forget not that they who passed their children through the fire to Moloch were pious also, and not more superstitious than any exclusive devotion to Christ has made many of his followers." I looked into that because I didn't know what that meant. And Moloch is a deity from the Masoretic texts. And those are, again, the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible. So again, you find that go back long enough and they know what they're quoting. She does it on purpose. They know the deities they're idealizing. And as Matthew points out, she's comparing Apollo to Jesus, which we know from Cult of Mithra, Sibyl and Attis. No surprise there. Transcendentalism was promoted through their magazine, The Dial, and Bronson Alcott, he ran a children's school. And that children's school was called a temple school because it was opened in 1834 in a former Masonic temple. And Emerson gave lectures there, while Fuller was also, Margaret Fuller, an assistant teacher. They didn't, when I read about it, they made it sound really cool because they didn't include punishment, no rulers, bad risk for you. But they replaced it with talking about things like circumcisions and the birthing process to children. So not much of a gain there. And one thing I learned about Bronson Alcott is he is the father of another famous feminist, Louise May Alcott, who is the author of Little Women, which I was very disappointed to find out because I really liked that book. But it's okay. Still a good book, even if she was manipulated through nefarious purposes and bred into this family of the Alcotts. Now, speaking of his school and doing weird things with children, we come to Margaret Sanger. Again, National Women's Hall of Fame. She published The Woman Rebel, a newspaper advocating birth control, and when indicted for sending obscene materials through the mail, she fled to Europe and gathered information there to avoid being persecuted. Now, when she fled to Europe, she left her husband and her 3 children behind. All three children ended up in boarding schools at one time or another. And one of them, her daughter Peggy, ended up dying from sickness while abroad in boarding school. So very good mother figure. In 1916, she opened a clinic in Brooklyn, was arrested, and served 30 days for distributing information about contraceptives. From then on, Sanger assumed leadership of the struggle for free access to birth control. She was persuasive, diligent, unafraid of the fight. Her arguments may vary. At first, she saw birth control as part of a socialist reordering, later as means to prevent the multiplication of the inflicted or to assure happy marriages, because we know that children are the bane of marriages. But always, Sanger saw it as a woman's issue, and she was prepared to take on the medical establishment, the churches, the legislatures, and the courts. This is what I found out about Sanger. Member of 1911 Women's Committee on New York Socialist Party. She quoted, "No woman can call herself free until she can choose consciously whether she will or will not be a mother." That's from Women and the New Race. After her daughter Peggy died, she tapped into Rosicrucian rituals, hoping to reconnect her with her daughter, guilty conscious. And Rosicrucian, there's a reason she did that, because there's a couple women that went into Rosicrucianism because it was close to these mystic practices. And there were a couple orders. Originally, it was like Freemasons, men only, but they, to be inclusive, incorporated these women later on. Founder of Planned Parenthood with funding from John D. Rockefeller. There's that name again. Quoted by H.G. Wells to be the greatest woman in the world. The movement she started will grow to be 100 years from now the most influential of all time in controlling man's destiny on Earth. Now, H.G. Wells, student of Darwinian biology and attended Oxford alongside all the Huxleys that we know, and F.E. Smith. I had never heard of F.E. Smith till Rachel's book. He is the author of The World in 2030 AD. It's like a series of essays. He was the first Earl of Birkenhead, very, very good friend to our beloved Winston Churchill, which Cynthia so graciously did a podcast with Macy and myself just recently. In his book, The World in 2030, there was an essay called Women in 2030, where he predicted the not so new technology of ectogenesis, artificial wombs, which sounds a lot like Gaia's parthenogenesis, not needing a man to do this thing. Very independent. And H.G. Wells co-authored books with Huxley's grandson, his own son, and it expounds Carl Jung theory, Darwinian theory, and on the bottom, I didn't know H.G. Wells did this book called Crux and Santa, and that's also part of the Theosophy symbol. Him and Margaret Sanger both had a thing, and many of these feminists, against Catholicism, Christianity, because it was the patriarchy. So another influence to Miss Sanger was our next figure, Annie Besant. Annie Besant, they found Sanger had a collection of writings that is in the Women's History of Sophia Smith. And Annie Besant was one of the first women to endorse birth control in 1877. So explains why Margaret Sanger took to her work. Now, who is Annie Besant? Annie Besant was a noted philosopher, social reformer, women's rights activist. Besides being a prolific writer and orator, her name remains inextricably linked with India's struggle for freedom. She figures among world-famous personalities who made India their home. This was in Feminism India. Now, what I learned about Miss Besant, she carried on. She was the main Padawan to Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy. Helena Blavatsky wrote Isis Unveiled. She was directly inspired by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which I didn't know. Thank you, Matthew. A quote here talking about Emerson, one of the most transcendental idealists of our century, in his essay on the Oversoul, gives in a few words the most superb definition of this psychological states above referred to, speaking of the commingling of the individual with the universal soul. He describes it by saying, I, the imperfect, adore my own perfect. So this Transcendentalism, Gnosticism, Neoplatonism, which I don't even like the way that sounds, because knowing what I know about Plato from Matthew, it's like they co-opted some really weird stuff for Neoplatonism. Theosophy takes after all of this. Members included W.B. Yeats, another thing that hit me in the gut, because really good poetry. L. Frank Baum, author of Wizard of Oz. His mother-in-law, Matilda J. Gage. Florence Farr, and Florence Farr was, again, a very prominent feminist. She was an actress. Known as a muse and a lover to George Bernard Shaw. We all know him. And W.B. Yeats both wrote of her as the ideal new woman because she was sexually liberated, independent, career-oriented. We have Henry Steele Olcott, also another founding member who helped carry this with Annie Besant after Blavatsky's death. Pauline Steinem and Ruth Steinem, Gloria Steinem's matriarchy, as I alluded to. And Alice Bailey. Alice Bailey and her 33-degree Freemason husband, Foster Bailey. Now, who is this figure of Alice Bailey? She is not a known feminist, but again, 1 degree of separation to all of these people. She founded the Lucifer Publishing Company. They changed it to Lucis Publishing Company, thinking Lucifer was a bit too blatant. You don't say, which became the Lucis Trust, still open today. She wrote 24 books. Many were on the theosophy, like religion, and promoting this mysticism, tapping into the transcendence. And she claimed all these books were intuited to her from her spiritual masters called the Tibetan. Now, she got those spiritual masters from Annie Besant, who got her spiritual masters from Helen Blavatsky. All of them were intuited their literature by these spirits. She wrote The Externalization of the Hierarchy, which connected her to the United Nations. It describes the blending of governments, religions, one consciousness, men and women being totally equal because all of humanity is totally equal. And her work really inspired the UN Spiritual Caucus, which I didn't know was a thing. She also wrote The Great Invocation, which was read on a live radio broadcast from the UN building in New York by feminist Eleanor Roosevelt. So some really weird stuff. Alice Bailey, she also had a UN NGO, so she really influenced them. It was called World Goodwill. There was a UN Assistant Secretary, General Robert Mueller, and he was a student of her work. So he ended up doing a World Core Curriculum, which won him a UNESCO Peace Education Prize. It was based on another book of Alice Bailey's, Education in the New World. So, and he also wrote, she had a publication called The Beacon. So, UN loves Alice Bailey. Now, this is fun since we're going into more of the modern day connections. A connection to not so grassroots feminist financier, father of feminism, other than the CIA, is the land donation from Rockefeller Jr. for the UN headquarters in Manhattan. And it also houses the New Age UN Spiritual Caucus we just alluded to. Another thing, Sanger's Birth Control Review publication featured the works of Ernst Rudin, a German eugenicist researcher of the Nazi Party. He was on the expert committee on questions and populations and racial policy, and he received 2 awards from Hitler. Knowing Operation Gladio, I'm just not surprised that, you get more influence of the Nazis. Cynthia explains it. Nazis never left. Of course, they found their way into the feminist movement. No surprise here. And the research that Ernst Rudin did in the Kaiser Wilhelm Society was funded again by Rockefeller. So big financier father. Thank you, Mr. Rockefellers. Now, I have to mention Victoria because she is a blatant bridge between the deities and our contemporary goddess culture. She also in the National Women's Hall of Fame. You know, going through it, Matthew, I know you told me to look into some more prominent figures, and I did. I read the works of Mary Curry, which I adored, and then I read Helen Keller and Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary Shelley. I think they only had Helen Keller in the National Women's Hall of Fame. Maybe they had Mary Wollstonecraft, but they didn't have Mary Shelley. They didn't have Madame Curie, which is mind-boggling to me. But they did have Victoria Claflin Woodhull, passionate campaigner for social justice who combined deep belief in spiritualism, radical views on achieving equal rights for women, advocacy of divorce law changes, birth control, working people's rights, tax reform as her platform for change, first American woman to address Congress, and first woman to run for office, President of the United States. That one's fun because she ran against Frederick Douglass. I don't know why anybody would run against Frederick Douglass, but she did in the, I believe, is the New Equal Rights Party. She was known by her followers as Mrs. Satan. Her and her family were, the whole family was snake oil salesmen. They moved constantly because they would sell these cures using magnet healing and stuff, saying that they could cure cancer and all this jazz. So right from the get-go, she was bred into this kind of family. Her and her sister did a clairvoyant duo. They would tell fortunes and all these things. And they did so well that the whole family ended up relying on their income doing this sister clairvoyant duo. Now, she quoted here, "Yes, I am a free lover. I have an inalienable constitutional and natural right to love whom I may, to love as long or as short as a period I can, to change that love every day if I please, and with that right neither you nor any law you can frame have any right to interfere." That was a speech, one of the many speeches she gave at Steinway Hall. She says this because marriage to her, like you saw, she was, you know, divorce rights law advocate. Marriage to her was the equivalent of basically sanctioned prostitution. Absolutely hated it. She called it rape. She called marriage rape. And her, like Annie Besant, Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, she claimed that this free love idea was intuited to her from the Greek orator. I'm going to butcher this, Demosthenes. If anybody wants to correct me, I will take it. He was a Greek orator, and she claims that his spirit intuited her these ideas. And then he told her, move to Manhattan. So she moved to Manhattan, where she met one of the richest men in history, Mr. Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Because she and her sister were known as being spirit mediums, he was known to hire spirit mediums and magnet healers already, so that's probably how they met. And he claims that this led to his 1869 stock market fortune before the Black Friday market crash. And he quoted to the newspapers, "Do as I do, consult the spirits." And the spirits in this case being the very talented Victoria. What everybody likes to leave out when recounting that story is that the knowledge of the Wall Street market crashing, not coming from the spirits, it came from Victoria's prostitute friend. I believe her name was Josie. And she was servicing his stockbroker nemesis, Jim Fisk. So, comes full circle. That's how he came around to his fortune. And in return for this fortune, he paid and bankrolled the first woman's own trading company, Woodhull, Claflin and Co., which did so well that they opened their own newspaper, Woodhull and Claflin's Weekly. And that newspaper is where they published the first English version of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Now, like I alluded to earlier, Equal Rights Party, she ran against Frederick Douglass. And to me, that's just madness. That is so insane. He did not acknowledge it, nor would I have. Nobody acknowledged the fact that she did this thing. Now we go on, right? And she's connected. This is a lady, I alluded to her earlier, very prominent feminist. Her connection to Victoria is that in Victoria's newspaper, Elizabeth Cady Stanton would give her some gossip on different figures, hoping to promote the cause of feminism, exposing hypocrisy on some financial figures and stuff like that for the sake of the equal rights movement. She here quoted, "This will never be a good world for women until the last remnant of the canon law is swept from the face of the earth." She, along many others, this is in her introduction to the Woman's Bible, written in 1895. And again, she says this because writing a women's Bible, because Catholicism, Christianity was patriarchy. It was the bane of all evil for women. And until that was gone, women could never be equal in their minds. Now, the fact that she quoted Charles Kingsley is very interesting, because Charles Kingsley, who is he? British clergyman, historian, novelist, church priest, student and professor after graduating, University of Cambridge. That's a good place to start. He exchanged letters with our Thomas Huxley about agnosticism. And he sat on a defense committee with Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin. So we come back to Thomas Carlyle from Transcendentalism, this big full circle. We've come all the way around. Now, if you haven't heard about John Ruskin, everybody should read Matthew's series on Edgar Allan Poe as cultural warrior. It's very good. That's where I got a lot of this knowledge and some of these ties. So read that. It is sublimely soul disrupting, is how I like to put it. So that would be the full circle. And now I alluded to my personal experience with her book. This is kind of where I come into that. Biggest takeaway is the 4-to-1 rule. It is one of those books I recommend everybody read it. Although you may think I've literally covered the entirety of the book, I swear I didn't. I only grabbed main tenets of the spiritual aspects. I didn't dive into Helena Blavatsky's origins, which both Matthew and Cynthia have done. So does Rachel. I didn't tie in the parallel from the Theosophical Society to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is where Aleister Crowley also plays a role, and he brings in more of Lilith and into the Wicca movement, which is the witchcraft and how that's spiritualism, the tarot card reading, the horoscopes. And I did this for brevity's sake, but there's this big tie over, so still read the book. And with that being said, when you read the book, there will be a couple things that I didn't agree with her on, because she's coming from the standpoint that all of this is downstream from the Protestant Reformation. She argues the Protestant Reformation allowing people to interpret their own relationship between God rather than having a priestess figure tell it to you is where things started to go downhill, and all of the religious sects we see came from that. Quakerism, Mormonism, all of these things. And there's part truth to it, because a lot of these feminists were in those downstream religious sects. They were Quakers and Theosophists, Transcendentalists, and there's part truth to her interpretation, though I would not put all of it on the straying away from Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism, which is where she stems from. So it's just keep that in mind when you go through the book. It's like anybody's reading, even hearing Gerald's going to do this, some work on Gandhi. It's 4-to-1 rule. Just because somebody does one thing that is not so good doesn't mean you completely write them off. Even in this book, I picked up Memoirs of the Vindication of the Rights of Women, which is the biography written by William Godwin, who is Mary Wollstonecraft's husband. And I picked this up because in Rachel's work, she criticizes Mary Wollstonecraft as having some scandalous relationships, children out of wedlock. And I wanted to find out for myself, so I just skipped all the third parties and went straight to the biography of her husband. And again, I found that she, being a feminist figure who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women, well, what I learned from Gerald's presentation, she had also done The Vindication of the Rights of Man first, and she gave birth to a beautiful child, Mary Shelley, who is one of my new favorite feminist figures. So it's one of those, am I going to idealize Mary Wollstonecraft? No. But am I going to discard her because she made mistakes? No. I've been there. If I in another life, and there are very many things she went through as a young kid who grew up in a weird family. She had a very close best friend. It's like I can relate to the story, and it takes time for her to become the woman that she was. Even her husband, William Godwin, said that some of the theories and the standpoints she had in Vindication of the Rights of Women, she didn't hold throughout her whole life. She wrote them in a fervor of passion, and then they kind of mellowed out as she got older, because we're all negotiating our relationship to humanity, but above all, ourselves, trying to figure out what we are to better negotiate who we are. And that's a classic example. So although Rachel criticizes her, she was just a woman trying to figure things out, and she did a lot of prominent things while doing this, some in the public face. So that's kind of my 2 bits. So worth reading, but just keep in mind different perspectives. And that concludes the presentation. I have chattered long enough, and we are open for discussion.
That was brilliant. Excellent. I've got so many pages of notes here, Madison, and no, your mind is just really moving in some very potent directions, and you've pulled up so many gems in your mining. I think of this sort of digging as mining and excavating for gold, and you found a lot of nuggets here. And I was actually just thinking to myself as you were bringing up Woodhull, I'm doing this series on the occult roots of Jack the Ripper, and I didn't even think I was going to write anything about this, but the thing that struck me, and I'd been looking into Woodhull as well from that angle, because one of the key characters playing the role in the ritual murders of Jack the Ripper is this dude, Robert Donston Stevenson, who, after carrying out these murders, after working with these top-level theosophists who are running Lucifer magazine, he's like a renowned black magician. He all of a sudden converts to Christianity and starts writing like patristic gospels. And the person who converted him was Victoria Woodhull. And I'm like, who's this Victoria Woodhull? And it's like strange connections to this whole nexus, but you did it so brilliantly with such a broad scope. So well done. And Cynthia and I, we picked up the copy of the book too, so we're also going to plunge into Rachel Wilson's book.
Oh yeah, because you did connections, and there's so many things that I wanted to tie in. You talked about what is it, the Sleepy Hollow Club?
Yeah.
And the Sleepy Hollow Club, it's funny because a lot of these feminists, all of them are buried in the Sleepy Hollow Club, like cemetery, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. There's just a lot of them. I just kept seeing the name pop up, but I didn't have the time to look into the Sleepy Hollow. So this is only one presentation. I've not even touched the surface, unfortunately.
Well, I love how you've given over the gift of a lot of loose ends to people as well to pull on as a little challenge to stimulate our own research and our own Promethean passion for discoveries. So wonderful. That being said, I think the time now is open up for some questions. I see that Monty has gotten one in there. So Monty, go for it.
Yes, thank you very much, Madison. I'm going to pull up your slide real quick here, so I'm going to keep talking. Okay, here we are. Yeah, it struck me again. It's been a burr under my saddle for many decades, and reminded again when you brought up on your slide on transcendentalism, there was a quote there that says, "I have no trouble so far as a sacrifice required by Abraham. It is prefiguring a thought to be fully expressed by the death of Christ." And it's been my contention for many decades that I suspect that the story of this pre-millennialist dispensationalism, in other words, God ordained certain things to happen on earth. And in this respect, Abraham was brought up at a time prior to Abraham where there was child sacrifice, and he had an epiphany on this mountain where it fundamentally changed that. So they went to doing heifers and animals, and at least in the Judaic tradition. Mm-hmm. But it appears what happened with Christ is they took away from Christ's mission, however you might, whether you see Christ as a historical figure or a mythology, but his mission to give it all for the sake of his friends, for mankind, it was completely been taken away from by this idea that God preordained his death. That, in other words, it was necessary for him to be crucified. So it seems like this is just was a story that was taken from some of these ancient cults and transformed and pasted over this, which to this day has taken away from really people being inspired to rise to the occasion of what it means to be willing to give your life for your friends. Could you comment on that, please?
Matthew or myself?
I think you're the maestro.
I'm the maestro. When it comes to, it's funny because talking with my client about how I was going to do this presentation, there were different dynamics about, again, the philosophy of it and the why behind all of this. I explained a lot of what's, the who's and the what's behind it, but the why, which is kind of what, Monty, you're alluding to. And I figured that would come up in the Q&A, which is the more personal aspect of it. And I knew that the brains would come up because I have a very big knowledge on the hemispheres, and Macy will be doing her presentation on that, maybe in sometime September, if I'm not mistaken, so stay tuned for that. And when it comes to the idealizing of the occult pagans, all these deities, the fact that it's parallels between Egypt, India, Mesopotamia, all around the same old 3000 BC time period, and then the weird parallels of Inanna's story, bearing the fruit of sex, and then we have Adam and Eve's story where she gets the tree of life, she eats the fruit, gets the knowledge. All of these parallels, I connect it rather so to the truth of the deities, which is some fear of, I guess, Christians and Catholics is because these pagans religions kind of started. I don't see them as, one before the other in a linear time frame. More so, I understand it came from the way we map as human beings because of the brain. We look, why did the Romans pick Venus as well as the Mesopotamians pick Venus? We look at things out externally to map what's also going on internally. So using the brain and the knowledge of the brain, you can understand why we take all of these myths and we personify things to understand. And that's not to discredit religion or faith. I'm a very faithful person. But it's to say two things can be true at the same time, that we can have personified these, partly created the myths and the legends and the religions at the same time as we create it because it's partly already within us. And so that's a shared truth. It's a shared truth that you see play over time. I don't know if that answers the question, but those are my 2 bits.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was nicely said. Jerry.
Yes, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you very much, Madison. That's given me about 10 years worth of research now I have to read up on. Just the connections of all these occultists. It's just, well, it's logical. But I wanted to thank you for bringing up the point about the Protestant Reformation, that one of the problems was there was no longer a central authority. And so anybody could just interpret a religion any way they wanted to. And because I noticed with a lot of this occultism, they really like to cherry pick from Hinduism. And this problem in Protestantism, you can multiply that by about 1,000 to get Hinduism because of the lack of a central authority on that. There's so many different sects and variations on it. But my question was, when you look at all of these strange occult and mystic, interpretations of, it's really a religion they're promoting. The thing I notice is there is a total lack of an idea of morality, that it's all this stuff they're trying to trick people and trick God and fool God, but there's no conception of morality. And I've just wondered if you saw that in your research and in reading this book.
That is definitely a question. Want to go straight to morality? I'd have to again allude to a little bit of the work on the hemispheres, because that's really what I saw when I was looking at these deities. I did not know just how far back that these paganistic and occult rituals went before Christianity. My knowledge about Christianity was kind of my first thing. So because it's the first thing I knew about, I thought, that was the big thing. All of the groups I grew up around were Christians. So when I found that out, it was interesting. But because I had the knowledge of the brain, it wasn't strange. And even morality, morality is one of those shared truths. It's like it's intuited, we have that is within us. It is not something we just make up on the spot. And that's one thing that I found funny learning about solipsism from Matthew's lectures on Plato and the sophist. The thing that the mistake it makes is saying that basically what solipsism is, everything comes from the brain. And as somebody who studies the brain, I understand that the brain is also a part of the body, and I am a product of everybody around me. I'm not just me. My context is my family and those who came before me. So when you look at things like morality and religion, I kind of separate, when I say faith and religion, two different things. Religion to me is like the dogma that manifests itself because people follow religions, but faith is something we do. It is something we are, I would like to say. Faith is something we are versus a religion, which is something we follow. In my sort of line of thinking anyway, from what I've learned about how our brain operates. And even when I say things come from the brain, I don't mean it only comes from the neurons in our brain, as if I even know what that means, because even somebody who studied it, I don't know what that means. I just gave you a lecture for like an hour, and I'm telling you, I still don't know half of the crap that I told you. There's still so much I don't know. So when people say things come from the brain and things and morality, it's like, do we know what that means? I'd like to humbly say we don't, but I know that we embody it together, shared all the time. So, and then I don't want to look at the people. And that's the thing, even back in the day in Mesopotamia, they were people. They had brains too. So they had morality because they had people, but did they know how to map it? Did they know how to express it? Did they, and again, as we get bigger in tribes, do you know how to share it? The fact that I can talk to all of you through a screen, they weren't doing that. Their communities were a couple hundred people, and now I'm talking to 30 and we're just online, let alone all the people I have in Calgary that I'm trying to help. So there's just this, I don't want to say that they didn't have morality, because they were made up of the same context, but the context surrounding them is what's different. It's the culture at the time, hence nature versus nurture. Well, it's both. It is not nature or nurture. It is the combination of, and I think that's morality is a manifestation of everything we're in relation to, our context and the context that is externally from us, if that makes sense.
Jerry seems satisfied.
I hope so.
Arlen and Cynthia have one of the two or both have a thought or question. Arlen, Cynthia.
Yep. Yeah. This is Arlen here right now.
Hey, Arlen.
Good to see you guys. Thank you so much for that presentation, Madison. That was great. Getting to the point about the morality and the brain, you know, I can't help but being affected similarly to what I believe Gerald said about the actions of these the people that are in the presentation, the whole push for feminism, or what to become feminism, was such a push into a direction that I think that it would be easy to agree that was an amoral push, meaning this notion that, and some of the women actually as examples where they had children where they didn't really seem to care about them, the one that, you know, went off to the boarding school and died, etc., that the thrust of the well-being of people and in their interest, the well-being of women, had nothing to do with the well-being of a society or the well-being of a people. They said it was, but in actual fact, when the family, the values of family and of even just childbirth are thrown out the window, how is that society going to continue? You know, when Jerry brought up the point about morals, I think that, you know, biblically it talks about that the truth is, God writes the truth on your heart. And so that when I think of morals, I think morals are not only something that I take from how do I put it, from a guideline that a faith or you know, my parents, that my family give to me saying this is right, this is wrong. I think that there becomes a fundamental action in moral behavior is something that extends and prolongs into more and more generations. And the success of humanity has been that there is the fact that we're still here so far, is that we do have some code of behavior of what is right and wrong. And that's where so many of these examples that I see you bring up with this push of feminism. I love the part about Gloria Steinem. I'm old enough to have seen the rise of her and Ms. Magazine and the rest of it.
I saw that one.
Yeah, but Cynthia's just commenting that she remembers that very specific issue. And so that what I'm getting back to is that there is a lack of that moral directive in so much of what has become this feminist push of, oh, woman power, just for the sake of woman power. It's like, well, okay, what do you want to be powerful for? What are you going to do with this power?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate how you framed that for my line of thought process. I like how you said that the morals were written on the heart. And one thing I've been hearing frequently, whenever I bring up the hemispheres, people say, I don't really like to trust my brain. It's, you know, it's the logic, but I really trust my gut and I trust my heart. Intuition. And I'm with you. Totally. Trust the intuition. Trust the gut. Well, as it is, there is only one hemisphere that is in tune with the body, and it is the right hemisphere. When you have a damaged right hemisphere, morality out the window. Goodbye. And so am I saying morality comes from the right hemisphere? The answer is in part. The other part is, again, when I say the brain, I don't mean the brain as isolated. The brain is not isolated ever. It's always in connection with the body. They're reciprocal. So if I refer to the brain, I'm referring to also the connection with the body. So when people say trust the heart, trust the gut, trust the intuition, it is because it and the right hemisphere have this reciprocal relationship where they can be in tune with morality, the right and wrong, because it has a sense of the other, things outside of ourself which is what you alluded to, Arlen, humanity. When the right hemisphere gets damaged, we can't have that connection with humanity. We can't even inhabit our own body, let alone another person's body, which is where empathy comes from. Again, the right hemisphere. So when we're talking about morality not being there, that's the one thing that's a beautiful gift about where we are as a society today, is how much knowledge we can acquire. My clan always says, know what you are to better negotiate who you are. I can attribute many of my attributes as, let alone a woman, a human being. That's one thing that you talk about with all these women, and there's a really big correlation between all those feminists getting divorces, having births out of wedlock, not taking care of their kids, all over the place. And growing up, when Matthew said, also bring in some more positive female figures, I went, I don't have any. And I was really grateful that he gave me Mary Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, Madame Curie, because growing up, I mimicked my dad, because my dad was a really hell of a good human being. And so I kind of skipped the how to be a good woman, and I went, how do I be a good human being? I went straight to humanity. And that particularity, learning good habits of a genuine person, it expanded into my womanhood, and it fleshed it out later. And I'm still fleshing it out, because again, we're a moving thing. So this idea of morality and being there, back in the day, Mesopotamia, they didn't understand themselves. I am so grateful that I understand my brain, the fact I understand even my hormone cycle as a woman. Knowing that my brain wasn't developed as an adolescent teenager helped me when I was having the mood swings and the normal depression that us young everybody gets. Because I knew I was going to go through that, I didn't think I was nuts. I didn't think I was crazy. I didn't personify it as I was being possessed, which is what they did back in the day. If you had some hormonal breakdown, it's like that woman needs an exorcism. It's like, or you're going through a normal little spout, ebb and flow of human experience. And so back in the day, for all we know, there were also people who had brain issues. Maybe they had lesions. They were doing immoral things. They didn't know how to interpret them, and then they called it demons. So it's just stuff like that, where it's like it's one big conglomeration. But I'm with you. Morality is something that it's in our actions, and you said actions because it's something we demonstrate, and that's where the hemispheres are really important, because there's two modes of attention. If the right hemisphere embodies humanity and our own body, the left hemisphere not so much. And then if you come at things through a left hemisphere mode of attention, you look at it through that frame of light, well, then of course you're going to miss morality. And then you get people like Margaret Sanger who discard her children because she's too busy having affairs with H.G. Wells and all that jazz, versus what I'm trying to do with my clan and trying to do and teach to other people is right hemisphere mode of attention. Pursue the particular, which is where God is in the particular, because I know humanity because I know myself. It's this back and forth. It's not one or the other. It is this reciprocal relationship. So I hope that comments better and reflects more of my line of thinking.
I see your finger
Sure.
went up there,
One more
Arlen.
thing to
You
add.
want to follow up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So the point you make about the right hemisphere being in tune with the body, I'm sure you're aware of this, but recently it's come to my attention that there's more information transferring hormonally from the gut, from the stomach to the brain. That there's actually more going on physically inside us. Well, physically, I don't even know if that's the right word, because what is the I mean, is a hormonal manufacture just a physical process of, if this, then this, and if that, then the other. And I don't know about that. I think that to bring it back to the fact that what your consciousness is, the function of your brain, when we learn that there's a whole set of signals that are coming from the stomach, from the gut, that changes, I think, necessarily this notion of thought and of what dictates when it comes back to interpreting what morals are, moral behavior, correct behavior, etc. But additionally, or lastly as well, the notion of where a thought comes from. So we like to have this concept that, well, I'm thinking about a problem, and in the case of putting together this presentation, you're reading different material, and you're thinking about how you're going to convey it to all of us so that it makes sense, and it's done with a personal flair of your own intention. And what comes for me is this thing of where thoughts come from. So you're trying to solve a problem, you don't have the problem. Nobody else is the answer to the problem. Nobody else has solved it already for your particular set of questions. And out of somewhere, out of some mist, out of some place comes a new creative thought. And, people will say, well, how did you come up with that? Well, I thought of it. It's like, well, where did it come from? Like, it's never been said or done that way before. And so, getting back to the hemispheres left and right, which I don't know much about, getting to the gut, giving hormonal signaling to the brain constantly, and then to the notion of consciousness, the question of consciousness. What is it? Where is it? What does it connect to? Is it just between the ears here? Is it in our body, in our heart? Is it something beyond? I leave that to the group to discuss.
I'm still okay, Matthew. I see you kissing your mic there.
No. It was just balancing. I was listening. No, I appreciate the open set of considerations to be tossed out and chewed on by people. I don't know. Do you want to address any of those thoughts that were developed?
Yeah, no, they're good thoughts, and I will repeat that when you talk about the gut and the brain. To me, it's even Matthew's work. I don't know if you've read Science Unshackled yet, but he wrote about how our neurons don't even go linearity. It's not one neuron to the next neuron. So it's not the gut to the brain or the brain to the gut. It is the gut and the brain neuronally coming together. It is this weird back and forth. And I think that is the reality of all processes. So I'm an artist. I've done many pieces before, and Gerald knows I did helped with one of his book covers. When I first got introduced to Over to the Youth, the youth group Matthew alluded to, I found out about them from the World Council for Health. And the World Council for Health was doing an animation competition. And my dad had sent it to me and said, you give that a go. Of course, I'd never done an animation before. So I was like, what on earth are you thinking that I can do this thing? But I did the thing. And it came to me, Arlen, as you described, I just saw it. I didn't think about it. In fact, I had forgot I was supposed to do it until 2 weeks before the competition was due. And I woke up and I went, that's it. I just saw the entirety of the thing, because that's how we think. That's how the right hemisphere thinks. Left hemisphere would think in linearity. It would think it goes from the gut to this neuron, then to there, and then to the brain. It thinks in bits. It thinks A, B, C. The right hemisphere sees the whole picture, and it's supposed to. And so when pieces like that come to me, it's like, well, I saw the whole, and then I have to use my left hemisphere to break it into the bits so I can physically make it. So looking at things in the sense of linearity is helpful for us to apprehend the world, but really how the world plays out is more in a comprehension. It's always the whole. It is the coming together of the brain and the body, not the brain or the body. We're the whole. We are our brain and our body. You don't just get one without the other. As soon as you take out the brain or the body, we're this really weird compensating creature, if anything. So I hope that answers your question.
And I think what you're doing nicely here is setting the stage for Macy's class, introducing Ian McGilchrist's concepts that take this a little bit further, which I also appreciate, in the sense that there's often been, whenever hearing discussion about the left versus right hemispheres, there's been a dichotomization of like, are you this or are you that? Whereas this approach does typically look at, well, how do they work and how are they meant to work together? While recognizing that there's certain services that one or the other is designed to also do that should be also used in the right way, that there's a healthy way for the brain to work and a disjointed way. And just by being familiar with different aspects of that and seeing their expression in different historical moments, or even in literature, you can sort of vector back to the physical expression of what is being showcased in a story or in a drama or anything else that's been done in different cultures as well. So it's a fun exercise.
Well, yeah, it's also necessary. It's like we learn about our bodies so we can maintain healthier bodies. Why wouldn't I learn about my mind, of which I am also, to have a healthier mind? It's like, why wouldn't you do this thing? It doesn't make sense.
I see Sue there with her digital hand up, and then Jerry has a follow-up. So Sue.
Hi, Madison. Thank you so much. That was a brilliant overview. I've listened to Rachel Wilson a couple of times, and so I really appreciated you raising the fact that she is pointing to Protestant Reformation. I felt like she could be so enriched by the work that Matt and Sydney are doing.
Mm-hmm.
What I really appreciated about her work, and in addition to raising awareness around the occult, was the nature of the sacramental marriage. And I think that through marriage, it brings us into union with God in a most profound way. Our knowledge of the sacrificial nature of life itself, when we promise to love, honor, and cherish in sickness and in health until death do us part. It's really how Christ loves us, how God loves us. And as we live into that more deeply, it enriches our whole community, our children. And it's really heartbreaking to see young women today so often speak about, I don't want children, I don't want to get married. And you see how they have achieved that to such a great degree. But if you'd just like to make a comment on any of that, or
I think you encapsulated Rachel's perspective beautifully, because that was one of the most profound things, was just the connection she found between all of these women having at least one divorce, almost all of them. Many of them did either mistreated their children or didn't have any. And that is, I grew up a little bit on that. I was actually went to an all-girls school from grade 7 to 9, and I fell into the same traps about, leaning towards veganism, because cows and how much water they use, it's detrimental to the environment, how people are a plague on this planet, and that we are part of the limits to growth problem, and women's powers clearly in their sexuality. All of these things. I fell into that when I was in my susceptible, ingenuous adolescence, obviously. And it's interesting looking back, as you say, on and looking currently at other younger women. And that's one of the things, it's like one of the questions I was wondering while I was doing this is, do I need to be a feminist to be a good woman? And as I alluded to earlier, the answer is no, because I didn't even think about how to be a good woman. I just wanted to be a good person. And then downstream, I've heard, so I'll take the compliments of other people and trust that I'm what they say I am, and they say I'm a decent young woman. So, okay, that wasn't my goal. I was just trying to be a good human being. And then this manifested. So even this idea of needing to be like that, the Hindu Shaktism, deity, goddess centric, have to really isolate myself as well. I need to acknowledge the fact that I'm different from men, and acknowledge where my head and my body does different things comparatively, but it's not the focus. And that's one thing that Rachel highlights, and that's why it's still a good book worth reading, because she brings in even the statistics about how abortions went up after it was made legalized. It wasn't higher before legalization, and the divorce rate going up. She brings in all the cultural aspects, and which is why, again, still a good read, worth it. So thank you for paying homage again to Rachel.
Yes. And overall, women's happiness has dropped dramatically. I think again, through marriage, there are aspects of ourselves that we come to know that I don't think we can come to know any other way. In so many aspects. So, but yeah, and the beautiful differences, as well as we are all human, but there are beautiful and wonderful differences that God created. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jerry, follow-up question is all yours.
Well, thanks. Madison, it's just something that went through my head, that your wonderful presentation on the occult roots of feminism, but you also showed the male side of it, in your references to H.G. Wells and the Huxleys and the Theosophists and the Transcendentalists and Carlyle and Ruskin and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. There is this connection. I don't know what to call it. Not feminism. I guess it's maleism. I don't know, but it reminded me of a story. This was many years ago, maybe 40, 50 years ago, when I was a young lad. And we were actually at a meeting and we were discussing feminism. And one person said, well, feminism is just a reaction to, the proliferation of magazines, like Playboy magazine had come out and all that. So a good friend of mine, she corrected us on that. And she said, well, no, the problem with Playboy magazine and all these, pornographic magazines was that whenever they had demonstrations against them, it was all women. And she said, the problem is it should have been all men, that men should have been demonstrating against this because of their attack on womanhood. And it's something that really stuck on me. So whenever I see feminism, I always look for the maleism that corresponds to that. So anyway, my question is, now that you've done this wonderful class on the occult roots of feminism, do you think you might do a class on the occult roots of the maleism part to that?
Where would I begin? Oh my gosh. I feel like Matthew's kind of already doing that though.
That's hilarious. Huh.
Yeah, I appreciate that story though, Gerald. Because it was funny. My dad made the statement and he was joking offhandedly while I was sitting at the table for the past week doing this presentation. And he's like, it's like, I'm trying to, teach them about, and I was trying to put it in a concise manner. And he's like, teaching women about the men that they're following. I was like, wait a minute. It's true. When you look at Thomas Carlyle and all of these movements, it's like, it is, in a sense, it's not exclusive to women. It's not just women leading women astray. It is all of the above. And again, I would attribute that because it is the idealization and the dogma of the hemispheres getting latched onto things. And then we have intentionally malevolent people that are trying to misguide us. So, and I'll have to think a little bit more about that, even your story about the men not being, not coming towards the fight as well, because if it is, as I believe, also a hemisphere problem, then everybody's got a hemisphere, men and women alike. So you're correct that it should also be these men coming out and contributing. And that's one of the things that was funny. Alice Bailey, she was a feminist, but her husband was also in these organizations. And it's these husband and wife teams. I didn't get to talk about Sophia Ripley or George Ripley, but they're also, again, these husband couple pairs, and they grow the ideology together when they stay together anyway. So I'll have to ponder that.
Yeah, there's a lot of very interesting ironies, that crop up when you think about things from this angle. Like you just pointed, I was thinking to myself as you were just speaking about like all of the husband-wife teams, like Margaret Mead and Bateson and Alvin Toffler and his wife, who have these like long relationships and their creative potency for their toxic ideas. It's so toxic and bad, but there's still something generative about somehow their collusion together, despite the fact that they're really on the wrong wavelength and God knows what else they're doing outside of the public light. But then what Jerry's saying too, and what your dad was just alluding to as well, that all of these feminist icons seem to have like male handlers behind the scenes, which is also a sick irony, a bit of a sick joke there. Yeah, something. There's definitely lots of research. Now, Anthony has a question. Anthony, do you want me to I guess he wrote the question out, so I'll just read it to you. He said, great lecture. My question is, my daughter is in year 4 PhD in psychology. Yeah. I still have a good relationship with her, but I could see the effects of liberal academia. Advice?
Sorry to make it a Dear Abby session there, Madison, but I really enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you very much. I'm glad people feel like they learned something. Making this, I kept telling Macy, it's like I don't know what to do. These people, you guys learn about Plato on like a regular basis. I'm like, what? Something new that I'm going to teach you. But hey, everybody has their avenues, which is the point. That's actually something I get almost everywhere I go. You know, being a part of the youth group, when I spoke at the Better Way conference, or How to Reclaim Canada, parents kept coming up to me. How do I talk to my kids? They're 14. They're starting to do the DEI thing. And it was the joke. There's a comedy special by Jim Bruner, and he talks about sending his daughter to university, and then she comes back and everything's sexist, racist. It's like, fair enough, man. One of the things I can definitely comment on is that I don't think it is a mistake that we are put into public school from the time of when we're little toddlers, and then we finish when we're 18-ish, which the time that the brain stops developing is like 25. Well, from 18 to 25, you're in university. So I don't think it is a coincidence that they purposely keep us into their indoctrination camps while we're in the most prime time of our brain trying to develop, which is, and everybody here is well-seasoned people trying to break a habit, especially a thinking habit, how to critically think. That takes time, especially when you spend most of your life doing it. So honestly, for one of my big mottos is just know what you are to better negotiate who you are. I'm not a mother. I haven't raised a kid, so I can't necessarily talk about the experience and how to pull somebody out. Even me, I have very interesting friendships because I'm pursuing knowledge like this on a regular basis. I still enjoy my music, but I try to listen to podcasts when I do my laundry or do the dishes. I'm that kind of kid. And so when my friends talk about Ariana Grande or Taylor Swift, I don't relate. I can't relate. And it saddens me that these are the figures that they're looking up to. You know, people are excited about Lady Gaga because Lady Gaga is in the new Joker movie and she has a great singing voice. And don't get me wrong, she has a great singing voice, but I can't ignore all the context surrounding this individual. Same with the Taylor Swifts and the Ariana Grandes and the same feminist ideology that they're pushing upon other girls like me. And I grew up with Taylor Swift. That's my Selena Gomez, for Pete's sake. So when it comes to, I still struggle trying to relate to my own age group and friends because I don't relate. That's not where my mode of attention is. And one thing that I'm trying to learn from my parents is that my parents used to put so much time into people, friends and loved ones, and try and get them to see another way, think another light. And frequently they say, if I could get that time back, all the time they spent investing in others, maybe they could have invested more in like their family themselves. So one thing I'm trying to learn is that I can't change people, but I can show them that there's something to change too. So I'm trying to show them what a decent woman looks like. I can only demonstrate it all the time, every day, and then hopefully they can themselves, because again, morality, what Arlen and Gerald were saying, it's inside of us. We know our potential. We know we can get there. So all they got to see how to get there. It's how to become the thing that we all can become. So I can't tell a woman to be a woman. I can't tell my friends and your daughter to become this thing, but I can show them that they can become this thing. They'll have to find their own way of doing it. But leading by demonstration is the only way that I've found how to do that thing. When people say advice, how do I do this thing? I'm like, show them. That's the only way I know how thus far. And it seems to work. It's just hella long. You have to be hella patient. It is not a quick process, but it is definitely true to how people seem to learn, which is what Matthew taught me too.
Oh, sure.
If I could just have a quick follow up to that, I totally hear what you're saying, and she has not been totally indoctrinated, if we could call it that. She is very receptive to Dr. Jordan Peterson. I don't know what you think about him.
The last slide of my presentation is probably the best way to sum up my view on Jordan Peterson, the 4-to-1 rule. They're very good. My family started with Jordan Peterson. That is how we woke up before COVID. So very grateful towards that individual. However, I don't agree when he says picks a side in the Israel-Palestine war, for example. So I can agree and appreciate an individual while not ideologizing him and following his dogma. So it's one of those, like everything, you treat it with discernment. I'll still watch his videos, and it's a great way to start up conversation with people who I'm still trying to help other youth, tap into their better nature. And a lot of them start with the Daily Wire. That's the common ground, is they like the Daily Wire and Jordan Peterson. So I'll take that any day of the week. And then we just talk, we become friends, we build the rapport, and talking is the best way because it's negotiation. And that's what my parents always did with me and Macy growing up, is we always felt like we had a say because it was a negotiation. It wasn't, I told you so, therefore it is. It was, this is what I think I know, but let's explore together. And because there was always a negotiation, I think that also helps with when I'm working with other kids my age who they find Daily Wire is the utmost, they are on the right track because they subscribe to the Daily Wire. It's like, we can work with that because it's just one thing of common ground, and then you negotiate from there on.
Yeah, and Cynthia and myself can testify that everything Madison just said, she lives it, and the family lives it. The Holmes family is really something quite interesting as a phenomenon, and we've had a chance to spend a week there a few months ago, and sure enough, it's a living process of constant idea sharing. You wake up for breakfast, and people are sharing the thoughts that they were working on and chewing on throughout the course of the night, as just both recreation, like breathing almost. And you can't teach swimming through the book, right? At a certain point, the best way to teach swimming for a child is to see people swim. It's not overly intellectual, although maybe you could read a book about techniques getting better or something like that. But overall, it's really practice. So the dialectic process is a living thing, and it can't. Yeah, it's a really good exposition you just did there, Madison. I really appreciate that. Arlen had a follow up.
Yes, thank you.
To Jerry.
Yeah, real quick. I know we're running late on time here, so I think one of the things that Matt and Cynthia, thank you to both of you for what you've exposed in the different writing and the different things that I've been able to get into, and that Madison brings, which then is also illuminated by both Anthony's comment about his daughter's university, as well as Madison's comment about Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, etc. And what I'm getting at, or rounding out there, is that Jerry's comment about, what was it, maleism or whatever, about the man version of feminism. I think that what's touched on, which resonated most clearly with me, with the commentary about Gloria Steinem with the CIA influence, and so and a directive, or directive might not be the right word, but again, not knowing all of the research behind this. Each of these movements, you have these figureheads, these different women who are writing this and theosophy and all the rest. Oh, we're this group and we're that group, but the push behind them that's supporting them, I don't believe it's just the men in their lives that's helping shape this new ideology. There's a directive that is we're going to move society in a direction, which I think Matt and Cynthia have been writing about all kinds of different things throughout history. It's plain as day, and yet we the undertone and the foundation is clearly there, and yet we still overlook it. Meaning, Madison says, well, her other friends are listening to Taylor Swift and Ariana Grande, whatever. It's like, yeah, but why are they famous? Why are they singing the songs they're singing? Sorry, my tinfoil hat. The CIA is and others have a directive of what type of music, what style, what's the messaging, etc. That goes right back to these early feminists and even current, whatever's happening in different ideological movements with trans and all these things. These are not grassroots movements. There's an interest behind it, and representing then to the universities and what has infiltrated in universities to shape the minds and hearts of young people. And again, as Madison said, all the way back to kindergarten and everything else. So to maintain that in the frontal part of our consciousness, even though it's sort of an undertone foundational element, why are these things happening? Well, these ladies would have said, 100 years ago, whatever, oh, well, it's for the well-being of women and of society. And it's like, no, bullshit. That's not what this is for. That's not why it's happening. It's happening for some directive that is, there's someone on the reins controlling the direction that this is going in. And without going any deeper into that, I think that it's important for us to remember that in each of the things that's come up in this discussion, that is a foundational, directing, energizing element.
Yeah, I hope that's kind of what the entire presentation, I hope, kind of came across, how not grassroots it was. And that's because a lot of my friends too, growing up, they were like, feminism, grassroots movement. It's like, actually, there was a statistic they took, I don't remember if it was in Manhattan or not, but there were anti-suffragette movements, and it was like it was 4% of women that actually wanted to vote because of all of these other complicated things that had to do with it back then. So it's not that grassroots. It's like, am I to say that, I'm not great, like I'm grateful that I can vote. I can say that. But do I understand that we also have this stupid taxes, which we all know, Jekyll Island, where taxes go, and the point of that, and the financial systems. So it's just big, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it is the underlying context. But all of these, what does Colonel Tanner always say? The sector, the tentacle, the sector of the deep roots. She's another Operation Gladio expert. I've been just trying to do her stuff, and holy cow, is that another thing that I'm like, whoo, not enough brain in here to comprehend what she's saying. But I appreciate you bringing that up, Arlen, because it is it's everything. Once you know it, it's like once you see Operation Gladio, once you see the Rockefellers and the financiers, once you see and it is directing, it is a guided hand, it is someone saying, come this way. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. And then you see it everywhere because it's everywhere. And that is important for the overall picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I appreciated very much in your presentation was rendering it, because a lot of people, they get sloppy when they start coming to the realization that all of our human history and experience has been shaped by conspiracy, by agendas and intentions to collude and make something happen, and they kind of fall apart. And there's not like a coherent, consistent method to deal with it, because there is sort of a recipe book that oligarchy per se is something more than any of the individuals or particular families that are making up the oligarchy. They do have certain, like a secret sauce, like a set of recipes that they abide by when making even their very long scale decisions. That has everything to do with this question that you made very nicely transparent throughout your thing, especially on the discussion of Kali and what's the name of that Gilgamesh, pre-Ishtar, what was it? Inanna, right? That was fascinating, by the way. I really appreciate the Inanna, because I hadn't really even considered Inanna as a pre-Isis, pre-Ishtar character, but that features all of the motifs very clearly. You could see it like, but they try to reduce the idea of love to eros. That's one of the key levers, is you have to make sure that people's, including the elites, idea of what love is completely limited to the erotic, and nothing beyond that is permitted, because that allows for internal social controls for the oligarchy, as well as for the masses who can't access the deeper part of themselves that they could only access if they realize that love is so much wider. There's a much bigger spectrum of this that takes you into the idea of agape, the idea of the higher dignity, the higher ideas of freedom that one can love, that if you just don't know it or don't believe it exists, you'll be limited to your identity and everything associated with erotic activity. And you see it embedded in the stories that they weave, that they want to make sacred, all of this stuff. It's a key lever. And you did that very, very nicely throughout this whole thing, whereby the idea of free love becomes actually what's enslaving you. It's the opposite of freedom that you're getting out of that idea. So yeah, I thought that was good. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something me and my sister were talking about just the other day, because it's actually kind of plays onto what Gerald was talking about. They throughout these goddesses, they promote the idea, again, Venus, Rome, Aphrodite, supposedly the goddesses of love, which really just translate into female sexuality. And then they tell women, and this is prominent in the female movement, that that's why is gender so important to women? I don't get it. I'm a woman and I don't get it. But it's this thing because that is our identity, is our sexuality. And it is based on our gender. And you see this in the old ancient deities, sorry. And it plays into the transgender movement, why sex and gender, there's so much emphasis on it, because that is who we are. And it's, as a woman, it's a very gross, because so all I am is the thing between my legs? I beg your pardon. No, that is something which we know from the Aristotle. It's not about the senses. It's not about this erotic stuff. It's something I have to manage. It's definitely a part of the equation. It's a part of what we do, but it's not my being. I have to manage that. But they tote that our power as women, and where it comes from our sexuality. That is really what they teach us. And it's, which is kind of why it's funny watching, Gerald bring up the story about the Playboy. It's like they tell men to hone in their inner beast. Don't be radical with your sexuality, tame it, be a responsible man. But they don't really say that to women. Not anymore anyway. Nowadays, sexual liberation is the thing. If you are that, you are the free, liberated woman. That's what Florence Farr was idealized by W.B. Yeats for. She was liberated, had affairs with a lot of these feminists had affairs, and they were promiscuous with their bodies. And it's a part of the movement that I don't appreciate. It's like, that is something that women should be honing and managing, just as men have to manage theirs. That is something every human being needs to manage, because like Aristotle, we're not just walking senses and pleasure. You don't just indulge that stuff. It's something you manage. It's an aspect of our overall thing.
Well, it's funny because it also reminds me, I was alluding to the unhealthy approach to the left-right hemisphere concept too, and it sort of is related to that same popular unhealthy thing we tend to do with the brain, which is also it's become almost a truism amongst those sort of enlightened, open-minded people to say, oh yeah, you're in touch with your feminine means like that you're in touch more with your sex energy, and if you're thinking too much logically, you're too in touch with your masculine energy. And I mean, that is so misogynistic in some ways, and also it's both anti-men and anti-female. It's like, but these are two aspects of just being human as well. And yeah, there are still male and human, male and female qualities, but to say that that logical thinking or sexual intuition is either men or male or female is really strange, but it's pervasive. It's really big. Gerald said that Athena was born fully armored. Jerry, what do you mean by that? Oh, sorry, Arlen.
Yeah.
But Jerry, what do you mean by that? What do you?
That's whenever you see pictures of Athena, she is in full armor, and the story is when she was born that way. So a different type of goddess.
Oh, that is the goddess of wisdom too, right? As well as knowing that you needed to sometimes do battle. But yeah, it's a
that sounds like Callie. That was Callie's goal too.
That
Bring
could be
about
the perverse version of it, the inside out version of the thing. Arlen, I'll let you get the last one in there. Go for it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. The point that Sue made, I'm trying to remember the term, but I believe it was sacramental marriage, or I can't remember what the word was, but basically that it was the union of the man and woman in what we would consider a moralistic or Christian relationship where they dedicate themselves to each other through sickness and health and all the rest of what she said. Now, I am obviously in that boat. Cynthia and I have been married for 40 years, and that's not changing, and we're stuck with that, and happy to be so. But the point is that Cynthia just came up with something that came from a gentleman, I believe his name is Father Seraphim, or another Orthodox monk, that to commit oneself to marriage, to a spouse, which goes back to even Madison, your commentary. What does it mean to be a woman? What does this mean, male, female? The commitment to a spouse is a greater commitment than that of a monk. That's what this monk was talking about, was that to go to a monastery and dedicate oneself to that faith and that daily ritual is nothing compared to what it takes to stand by someone in that loving relationship. And with what Matt's saying as well, that this is not 40 years of sexual relations. This is 40 years of dedication to another soul, to a relationship, to a thing that was formed by that union before God. And so I just wanted to bring that back to what Sue had said, that the value of the self, defining who it is, man or woman, and dedicating to a relationship back to the moral virtue of a continuation of society. That is the model, and that's what Madison did such a good job of showing with all of these different characters that brought forth this alleged feminism, was just to break that down, was just to degrade, Matt, what you said, degrade both men and women. Like, this isn't about uplifting society and making the world a better place. So thank you.
Madison, you hit it out of the park. That was great. Really good. All right, so we're going to make sure that this gets online pretty soon. I encourage everyone to share it with their friends and families, and just use this as a catalyzer to start up some good conversation if possible. I know next week, this also sets the stage. Next week, we have Nick Jones, our ballet dancer friend, who's going to be doing something on the occult subversion of ballet, which will take us into some high epistemological warfare, going through all sorts of Masonic operations in Russia, France, you name it. It's going to blow your minds. He gave me a quick briefing. It sounds great. So I think it's really going to dovetail actually with what Madison just set the stage for as well, which is pretty fun. So that'll be next Sunday, 2 p.m. Hope everyone can make it. And otherwise, thank you for taking the time this Sunday to enjoy some universal ideas with all of us. And thank you, Madison.
Thank you, Madison. Thank you, Matt. Madison. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah,
Thank you,
adios.
Madison.
Adios.